Welcome to the Gem State Brief. My name is Sam Rust, and today we're excited to talk to Mike Forsythe about private property rights and his recent clash with government bureaucrats in Ada County. Mike's an Idaho native, attorney, and a rancher with deep family ties to the Gem State. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it.
Yeah. You've been operating Stack Rock Ranch for a number of years. It's been in your family for many, many years. Maybe you could give us a little bit of history as we're kind of diving into a little bit of a saga here.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. In 1983, November of 83, my grandfather purchased that land. Initially, I think he purchased about 1,000 acres. And over time, we've grown that. We have now close to 1,700 acres in total. In 1983, when he purchased it, he let it sit over the course of a few months. And in 84, he started building his house up there, finished it in 86. And there was basically nothing on the property at that time. And I still have photos, and I didn't bring any, of course, today, but I have photos of the land as it looked in 1984. And there were fields, and it was beautiful, and there was nothing below. So, of course, no Hidden Springs, no Dry Creek Ranch. He constructed most all of the roads, built buildings, and then started breeding horses. And what was horses and then draft horses turned into mules, cattle, sheep, and turkeys. And Sam, I don't think that there's anything that's alive that we haven't had up there.
That's fantastic. Love the legacy. So we're talking today about Stack Rock Ranch, which to orient folks is up north of Hidden Springs.
That's right.
So you're bordering public land up there,
We do.
Okay.
We do. So on our west is Avamore, and there's private property owners on the west, and then Hidden Springs. And on our south is Daniels Creek, which is basically Cartwright Ranch. On our east is the Aradas, Daniels Creek again. And then there's some BLM land that we're contiguous to. And then to our northeast, we actually border the city of Boise property, which is Stack Rock Ranch. Is just Stack Rock. So you can go directly from our property to Stack Rock and then to Bogus, which is all U.S. Forest Service land.
Okay, excellent. And we're wanting to talk today about some specific set of circumstances that
Sure.
lead us to an upcoming meeting in front of Ada County. Maybe you could give us a little bit of background on what you're doing with the property, how the use cases have evolved over the last couple of years, and then kind of lead us into the set of circumstances where we find ourselves today.
Sure, and I'm happy to dialogue it. So if I come up with something and you have questions, please be sure and ask, and I will answer. Very easily, when my grandfather passed in 2015, we just permitted the ranch hand that we had to continue to operate the property in the way that it was. And slowly it slowed down over the course of some years. So in 2021, I took over management and operation of the property. And as every generation should, I looked at the property and I said, how can we best use it? How is the best utilization of the property? What did we do great in the past? What can we do different moving forward? So when we were looking at that, we decided to continue running cattle. We've been running cattle, like I said, since the 80s. We decided to continue doing that. But what directly led to what we're doing now is a conversation that I had with a mutual friend who introduced me to Nate Castillo. And Nate Castillo told me about his heart for training people, for firearms training, about his background, and what he wanted to do as far as giving of his time to help single women, mothers, families, church security teams, and school security teams, and training them up in how to protect others. And I thought, you know what, Nate? We've been shooting on the property since the 80s. We have some really great locations that we can shoot at. I would love to donate this. I would love to come alongside you and help you in your mission. So that's what we did. That was a conversation in maybe 2022 initially. And it was spring of 23. And I went down and I had some tools. I had an excavator. And there was a spot that we had been shooting at, again, the 80s. And the reason we shoot there, and I want to be able to lay all this out, Sam, is we selected that spot then and again now because it sits in the bottom of a valley. So there are 3 ridges that run alongside it, one to the west, one to the south, and one to the east. And as the 3 ridges come down, there's the confluence of 3 valleys. And so it's literally a hole, and there's 70-foot tall hills that circle it. So the reason
Exactly what you'd want for a shooting range.
yeah, you cannot shoot off that location without intentionally shooting over a 70-foot hill. So it was the best possible location we could be at. And I took the equipment down, and we already had backstops, we already had berms. What I did is I cleaned out the ground and I made side berms just to make it safer for everybody. And I said, okay, Nate, here you go. We can start using this. And then I thought, it's going to get muddy because it always gets muddy up here. I'm going to see if I can find some used AstroTurf. So I found a broker of used AstroTurf, and I bought some AstroTurf and I brought it in. So now instead of standing in the mud in the wintertime or in the spring or in the fall, we can stand on AstroTurf. So these are the improvements. Oh, and I also brought in used tires as a backstop.
Sure.
So these are the improvements that we have made to this area of property.
And to be clear, Mike, this is all on private property, not bordering anybody else. Like it's inside your property.
It's in the middle of our property.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Our closest neighbor to the west is, again, over this 70-foot mountain. And I think the elevation via Google Earth, and I Google Earth, it is about 100 feet at the peak between where we're at in the bottom, the top, and then where he's at on the other side. And then it's 600 yards between these 2 locations. So 1,760 yards a mile. So we're about a third of a mile before you get to his house. So we improved it. He started using it.
And this is all happening 2023, give or take.
Yeah, I think that was appropriate, or that's accurate. I think it's 2023.
Okay.
So Nate starts using it, and initially it starts slow because Nate was still building his business. And as he had this opportunity to build a business, it became busier, which is fine. Nate is my friend. These are my invited guests upon my property. Please come and shoot. So one day I received a text message from the neighbor, that one neighbor that I was telling you is 600 yards away. I received a text message that he said, well, it sounds like it's the Middle East here. What is going on? And I quickly texted Nate and I said, well, we had already established certain criteria for time periods in which we were going to shoot, what kind of weapons we were going to shoot. We had expressly requested suppressors be used if possible to try and be good neighbors before there was ever an issue. And I texted Nate and I said, what's going on? And he said, well, we're actually done. There's nothing going on. And I said, well, the neighbor said it sounded like it was the Middle East or it was Afghanistan. He said, well, I've been in Afghanistan. It didn't sound like Afghanistan. Okay, well, that's fine. So I was actually out of town. I came back home and I said, Nate, you go shoot. I'm going to confirm our sound level. Went out and I confirmed the sound level. Interestingly enough, I stood at the neighbor's gate, used a decibel recording device, and the birds chirping were louder than the gunshots. Now you could hear the gunshots. There's no doubt. You can hear what it is.
You know what's going on, but still, it's not.
It wasn't loud and obnoxious.
Yeah. Okay.
So he proceeds 2 weeks later to send me a cease and desist letter via his attorney. And he said in his letter, well, I walked up and I talked to these people who are waiting at your gate, and they're going in and they're using this property. They're using this, what he called was the shooting range, for commercial use. He's using it for training. This is unacceptable use of your property. I am getting headaches. I don't like the sound. I don't appreciate the sound. It is problematic and troublesome. And so I, in turn, wrote him a cease and desist letter, and I said, stop harassing my guests or I will sue you. And that was where it left. At that point, then...
If I could just pause you real quick,
absolutely.
Mike. At this point in time, so you have the back and forth between you and the neighbor.
Yeah.
Nate Castillo is bringing people onto the property, single mothers, school security teams, church security teams. Is he paying you for the use of the ground, or is this just, you're inviting people on and this is part of your community
No,
service, as it
no.
were?
Initially, Nate and I had talked about some sort of payment, and my wife and I decided that this was really a mission and a vision that we loved, and so we told Nate, no, we don't want you to pay us.
Yeah. So to be clear, no money is changing hands. This doesn't qualify as a commercial use,
Right,
at least as far as the landowner is concerned.
right,
Okay. Pick the story back up.
right. So,
Mutually sent
and
each other
that's
cease and desist.
yes, that's a really good question, and it's a great distinction that there's no commercial activity occurring in regard to the range. And there's a really great analogy to that, Sam. I'll give you here, and then I'll pick that story up. But if you were to decide you wanted to host a Bible study in the morning at your home, and you said, I would really like to feed the guys who are coming here, but I'm a terrible cook. So I'm going to obtain someone to cook us meals. And you contacted a caterer, and you said, caterer, please come in and prepare us meals. Is your kitchen now a commercial kitchen?
I would not think so, but I'm curious for the attorney's take
No,
on this.
it's not a commercial kitchen. Your kitchen changes not due to whom's using it, but the actual activity of the kitchen. And in Ada County, the county is unable to actually make rules regarding the invited guests' use of your property, especially when it comes to firearms. Now, there are some limitations on sound restrictions, and this is what we were talking about. We went and measured it. The sound noise level was higher by the birds than it was the shooting. And I said, well, that's great. Okay, I don't really need to worry about it here. Let's just make sure that it's not too loud down below. So there's two neighborhoods that are down below us. And I drove down. Nate, please proceed. Keep shooting. Nope. Checked it again, well below the requirement. And if I recall, the requirement's either 65 or 66 decibels. We're talking in the 40s during the gun. So we decided we've satisfied the noise requirement. Really, that's the only restriction we were concerned about. We're not operating it commercially. Nate, please proceed. So time goes by, and I couldn't tell you, Sam, how many months it was, but it must have been 6 months. And I received a phone call, if I remember right. There's a phone call and a letter, and I just don't recall which one occurred first, but it was from a code enforcement officer. And he said, well, you're in violation of the code. You need to cease and desist with the shooting. I said, well, they're my invited guests, and you don't have the authority to tell me to cease and desist with the discharge of firearms on private property in the county during daylight hours that fall well underneath the threshold of the decibel limit on sound. And he said, well, I disagree with you. I said, well, you disagree with me all you want. Cite me. Send me a citation so that I can go to court. He refused to do it. And at that point, now my property has been flagged in the Ada County. So how a property becomes flagged, I don't entirely know. How a property becomes unflagged is a mystery as deep. So now the property is flagged. At this point in time, my wife and I decide we want to build a house up there for us to live in. And we went to discuss this with Ada County Development Services. And Leon Letzen at Development Services was a great guy. Leon has left. He is now with Idaho Power. And Leon and I had this discussion, and he said, well, the issue is your property's been flagged, and we can't provide you with a building permit. You're unable to move forward due to this flagging.
So I want to clarify this and make sure that we're catching this for
Please
the
do.
audience. You're saying that there's a system that isn't publicly available whereby a property can be flagged for any manner of things. And to be clear, there's valid code enforcement issues all over the place, but there's no standard that's objective and available to the public that we know of or that you know of a property can be flagged. And then if it is flagged, there's not a remediation path to get it unflagged that's clear. And while a property is in that state, building permits cannot be issued.
So let's break it down in reverse order of the way you asked the question. While it's flagged, building permits will not be issued. That is true. There is a code section on that. How it became flagged is the first question you asked. And the reality is it becomes flagged probably through a complaint and investigation.
Okay.
The outcome of the investigation should be a citation, because that is what due process is, then allowing a landowner who has now been cited to go before the court, right? So we have the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches.
Mm-hmm.
The legislative branches creates the code. The executive branch is designed to enforce the code. Judicial branch then oversees whether or not there was a violation of the code. So what we have is the legislative branch, which is Ada County, and the quasi-legislative branch being the Development Services. That's an administrative agency.
Sure.
And then even the Board of County Commissioners, quasi-legislative. And then you have the executive branch telling me they believe I have violated this. Great. Cite me. Again, I'm sorry, I'm getting in the weeds a little bit.
This is important, though.
But cite me.
Mm-hmm.
That way I can go to the judicial branch and have a legal hearing as to whether or not I have violated the code. And I have not been granted that. I have been denied due process when it comes to the issue of building my home, and I have asked for it. I even received a letter from the Ada County prosecuting attorney, Jan Bettis. She said, if you don't move forward, then there may be consequences. But she has refused to cite me. There's nothing for her to do until there's a citation. And at this point, she isn't asking the Ada County Sheriff to cite me, and the Ada County Sheriff isn't citing me. And I think this is me speculating. I think there's two reasons. The Ada County Sheriff doesn't want to cite me because he believes this is a losing matter, right? So the issue of private property ownership, discharging firearms in Ada County in Idaho on private property is a losing matter for him, and he has an election.
The optics are bad.
Jan, I think this year is up for an election, right? So she's not going to want to cite me and take me to court under a violation when the optics, again, like you said, are bad. So now how do I get off of that? That was the third part of your question. There's three ways to get off of it. One, I cease the activity. Two, I come into, it's basically you must come into compliance, which is ceasing the activity or obtaining a conditional use permit. So I have obtained a conditional use permit, but there was an appeal. And so then they're refusing to issue, again, it's in the code, so that's fine, but they're refusing to issue the building permit until the appeal process is complete.
So there's a couple articles that are available on
Yes.
Boise Dev and some other sources. But one of those articles says that the first violation notice from Ada County was issued in September of 2024.
Okay.
I want to be clear. What you're saying is there has not been a citation.
There's never been a citation.
Which is different than a violation notice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, a violation notice is a letter that says you are in violation, or we believe you to be in violation. A citation is we believe it's strong enough to issue you a ticket or a legal complaint to that point. I can't go to court. I can't act as a defendant and be heard on a notice letter. There's no mechanism. So there's no mechanism for an adjudication to the question as to whether or not I am in violation or I'm not in violation.
So at this point, sorry to back you up a little bit,
please.
but you go through, you get the violation notice, you examine your options, you realize that they're not willing to give you a citation, much as you didn't want one, but you wanted one to be able to defend your rights.
Right.
So you really don't have a lot of options if you want to continue pushing forward to build your home on this property. And so you decided at that point in time to voluntarily apply for a conditional use permit. You'll often hear this referred to as a CUP.
Yes.
Can you describe what a CUP is for the average person who maybe doesn't know planning and zoning very well?
So the conditional use permit process is a matter of a number of forms that you must complete. There's a number of requirements for each form. We had to provide a site plan with some basic information. if we're in a certain area called the Wild and Urban Interface Area, or short form is WUI, then you must obtain also compliance with fire. So you have to have a fire study completed. Um, the fire study alone, I think it's between $8,000 and $10,000.
Okay.
So you have to have a fire study completed. Now, also incidentally, they're asking for a traffic study and a parking plan. We can talk about whether or not a parking plan is appropriate when you have 1,300 acres. Here's my response. Where would you like to park? There's my parking. But when you're going through the conditional use permit process, you must have a neighborhood meeting. You must provide notice to your neighbors. You must provide signage. All of these things cost money and take.
Sure.
I think that depending on the conditional use permit, there's also a master site plan that must be submitted alongside it. There's a number of documents. There's a lot of ground and legwork that goes into obtaining a conditional use permit. Now, can anyone do it? Absolutely. Am I glad I'm an attorney to get through it? I sure am. But it's lengthy. It took me a month just to prepare all of the documents, maybe slightly longer before I had all of the information regarding the fire plans, and then you submit it, right? So then once you submit, then you have a public hearing. And that was our first public hearing that we had, I want to say September 11th. That was our first public hearing. There were...
And this is in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission of
Right.
Ada County,
That
correct?
is correct.
So just, if I could interject here a
Please.
little bit, as a former planning and zoning commissioner myself, so city staff, or in this case, county staff, takes in the findings in your application for this CUP. They evaluate it against the standards in the code, determine whether it fits with the city's master plan or the county's master plan, and then they make recommendations to the deciding body, which in this case is the Planning and Zoning Commission of Ada County.
Right.
They compile a staff report, but then the deciding body is the Planning and Zoning Board.
That's
so
right.
We're here on September 11th with the staff report, all of your documentation that you've submitted. Take it from there.
So, I would like to also add that in the staff report, it's unfortunate that staff has a real opportunity to provide bias in their staff report. I'm sure when you sat in Meridian and listened and read through staff reports, you could see that.
Yes.
I hope that you didn't, but I'm imagining you could. So when you look at the staff report for that September 11th hearing, you'll notice a lot of circular reasoning. And so when I went up and I addressed the staff report, I really, and let me also make this statement. Leon Letson left Ada County in the middle of this process that I was going through with Leon. Again, I really liked Leon. Richard Beck, the director, took over in his stead. Now, if you look at Mr. Beck's bio online, he attended BYU, and then, which I don't know is a liberal school, conservative school. I don't know how it leans, but his position on the website is he likes to grant each of his planners the ability to create within the plan things that are important to them and to really put their fingerprints on every plan that comes through the county. Sam, is it appropriate for a government agent to be putting their fingerprints on a plan in which they have no skin in the game? So they're not a developer. They're not spending any money. They're not a landowner. They don't own the land. They have no liability and no risk. And we're okay with planners I'll use the word screwing with. You could use other terminology, but planners then interacting and changing a developer's plan or a landowner's plan because they want their fingerprints on it. Is that is that really what we want the government to be doing?
Well, and just as a sidebar, these positions are not elected positions.
100%.
It'd be one thing if there was recourse through elections, but this is a government bureaucratic position that's filled and several links down the chain from any elected position.
Yes.
So there's even less recourse than you would have in some other offices.
And that is in my mind one of the biggest problems is I looked at the language Mr. Beck used when I went and argued the staff report, and I really repeatedly went and said the reasoning is faulty, and therefore, because the reasoning was faulty, his conclusions were circular. It is because it is not a legitimate reason. That is poor reasoning, and so your conclusions, you can't hold to the conclusion. Mr. Beck had a very clear opinion, and it was shown through the drafting and the writing. Now, I will refrain from giving too much of my opinion of Mr. Beck, but the biggest problem here is these people, meaning staff, there is no recourse. There is no way to remove Mr. Beck from his position for denying us due process. So either give me, again, I'm going to hammer on this because I'm really frustrated about it. Either give me the citation and let me have due process, or let me build the house. It's really simple. So back to the story. We went and I stood up and I presented. I really, unfortunately, trashed this report. It probably didn't bode well with his inner id, if you will, right? So we went through. We had hours and hours of testimony. The meeting started at 6 and it concluded at midnight. We were the last one up. They knew that it would be very controversial, so they put us at the end. I think we started around 8, maybe slightly before. 4 hours of testimony. I testified to these things. At the end, we get to the point where it's a 2-2 deadlock vote. And so the commissioner said, and this was quite frustrating to me. During the course of the meeting, there were a number of times that there were questions, but I was not permitted to speak to the questions that I could answer. Questions specifically about the property. They were discussing amongst themselves, but there was no way for me to speak to it and to provide answers. And sometimes Mr. Beck would actually guide the discussion, guide the outcome by the way he provided information to them. And I was really frustrated. At the end, deadlock 2-2, they said, we can do two things. We can table it and hold over until the next meeting in November, in which case we'll take you up again as a tabled event, or we can deny and you can appeal. So, well, I don't want to come from behind, right? So I don't want to come from a denial. Table me, we'll do this again. So they did. And then in November, it came forward again. There was as much testimony. They initially said, we're going to limit the testimony to just a few questions. The questions were related to ACHD. ACHD had not provided a statement regarding the traffic that was on the road. And you probably know this, but for the rest of your audience, if a government agency does not provide comment, it's because they're not worried about it.
Yes.
So ACHD had not provided comment. I had provided the fire mitigation plan to them meaning to the Board of County Commissioner or to the Board of Planning and Zoning, but they had not received it in time, so they were able to review that at that time. There was a question about wildlife because we're in what is an overlay for the wintering wildlife district overlay. So let me explain a little bit about that. The Wintering Wildlife District overlay was created by a combination of efforts between Ada County, the Planning and Zoning, and Idaho Fish and Game. And I spoke to the Idaho Fish and Game officer who does these approvals for an hour about this process. And he said, the reason we did that is I am the sole guy at Idaho Fish and Game responsible for looking at all of the plans in Ada County. There is too much work for me to do for the entire county. So what we did is we created an overlay. The overlay is a map that overlays, where it gets its name, it's just certain areas of the county in which we're concerned about sensitive wildlife. And if we don't respond, that means, again, like the other agencies, we're not worried about it. So the overlay was never designed to be a reason to deny, but only if the application falls on property that's within the overlay, please send it to us so that we can take a look at it. I explained what we were doing. He was actually quite frustrated that he even had to deal with this and that the way that the first hearing had gone. He explained that he has no problem with what we're doing. He wrote a letter to that effect. It was actually quite difficult for me to get him to write a letter because he didn't want the political fallout that would occur from one agency disagreeing with another agency.
Yep.
And so that was quite frustrating. So we went to the second hearing. These were all the questions.
And if I could stop you right there,
Absolutely.
one thing that I wanted to clarify, because this is going to come up later and
Yes.
it's more relevant to this upcoming meeting, but there was a sound study. Was the sound study that you completed in between September 11th and November 13th, or was it prior to the September 11th meeting?
No, I think that it was in between.
That was one of the things I thought I saw that they
Yeah.
requested coming out of the continuance was go do a sound study,
Yep.
which would verify all the readings that you took a couple of years prior.
Yes, that's exactly right. They asked for a sound study. We contracted with Tech Hub to do that sound study. Mr. Matt Archer came out. He performed the sound study. I want to say no, that was the second sound study that Mr. Archer performed. I think there was a preliminary sound study because if I recall correctly, Mr. Archer had to buy additional microphones specific for this purpose. I believe there may have been a primary sound study, but they wanted additional details on it.
Okay.
So in any case, there was a second sound study. So now we have done 2 sound studies by Tech Hub and our preliminary sound review that we did at the very beginning before we really got into the shooting. And so Mr. Archer has completed that. All of our data falls well underneath what is required. Now, in this most recent findings of fact that I actually just received yesterday for the hearing coming up, they discuss Mr. Archer's failure to provide some basic before and after the shooting measurements, initial measurements.
So I read through that staff report.
Great.
And there's 21 bullet points in this report, which is more than I've seen on any single issue in any document, any staff report that I've seen at the city level. 21 specifically to explain why they are not allowing or they're not receiving the report as generated. And
Right.
from everything that I can find in original staff reports and testimony and this final staff report, you followed the request and the protocol that was laid out for you to actually contract Mr. Matt Archer for this sound study. And now it feels like they're moving the goalposts
They
again.
keep
Is
moving
that
the
a
goalposts.
fair characterization?
That's absolutely correct. And so, and to that point exactly, in the hearing in September, there was a board commissioner who asked for some additional sound information from an independent third party. And she referenced another study that had been done for another application, but she did not say your study needs to mirror this. Your study needs to look like that. It needs to be done to this standard. Please just get us another study is what she said. So Mr. Castillo, Nate Castillo, when we were reviewing what had been requested and what came out of that very first hearing, he called Mr. Beck and he said, Mr. Beck, we would like to use Mr. Archer again. He is a neutral third party. And are there other standards that you would have us to use? Because there are no standards provided. No. He said, Matt's fine. And he gave us no additional criteria for standards. So if there's no additional criteria for standards, then we're going to use best practices. Okay. So that's what Mr. Archer did. Now, there was some testimony about specific noise standard requirements that are in the code. But if you look at that code section is very specific to its state-owned firing ranges must abide to this standard for their noise testing. It has nothing about private property owners abiding to the same standard. So, but to your point, 21 bullet points, that's a lot of bullet points.
It's 3 whole pages of the report dedicated to disallowing the study that they told you was allowable and would meet the criteria.
But did you notice in that, what did they never dispute?
The results.
They never disputed the raw data. At no point in time have they disputed the actual fact that we still fall well below, so far below that a minor adjustment of a baseline level isn't going to change whether or not we're within compliance. They never dispute that.
So where we stand today, the November
Yeah.
11th hearing,
Yes.
you break through the deadlock, you get your conditional use permit. All is well with the world. You're ready to go.
We would think so. Yes. Until there is an appeal. And what's interesting is there was conditions of approval. And in those conditions of approval, Mr. Beck included language that was in some strange code sections. And I couldn't find these code sections. And I finally emailed him and I said, Beck, you're going to have to point me to these code sections because they actually don't exist. They're not published code sections. Well, we're just passing new legislation or new code sections now. These are out of the new code sections. Well, what standard are you applying here? Because these new code sections aren't published for anyone to even see yet. And I'm not even sure that at that date that they had been enacted. I haven't done it because frankly, it is conditions of approval that are nothing more than bureaucratic red tape, specifically a parking study, right? So again, 1,300 or more acres, and this parcel alone is well over 400 acres. My parking is wherever gentlemen would like to park when they come up and shoot. They do ask for other conditions of approval, such as engineering on dirt that had been moved. I'm not moving dirt now. The dirt has been moved in the past. I'm not asking for your permission to move the dirt. The dirt isn't going anywhere but on my property. There's no need for an engineering study for dirt that is not affecting anyone. Now, if I'm going to build a house on it, then I'm going to need an engineering study as part of my house permit. But I don't need it for simply moving
For things that have already occurred.
for things that are both occurred and are unaffected to any member of the public.
So now it's being appealed up to the county commissioners, I assume?
Yes, we go to the county commissioners on the 11th at 6:00.
Yeah. So March 11th, you'll be in front of the county commissioners. And we've gone into a lot of detail here.
Yes.
And a lot of this is going to seem really like small minutia, and it really frankly is, right? But it combines into a really salient point for all Idaho landowners, which is through really governmental fiat, local agencies and planning departments have the ability to completely halt essentially any activity because the code is broad enough and vague enough that you can pluck these things and just stymie progress, or in your case, a family being able to do what they want on their land when they want to, within reason. We're not talking about some commercial venture. We're not talking about, a recycling facility. There's some egregious abuses of what people do on their private property. This is well within what's allowable, just from a common sense perspective. And yet you've spent, at this point, probably hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars trying to just allow for friends and family to come on and shoot at a lightly improved area on your ranch.
That's exactly right. Now, this is even bigger than just the operation of this, or stymieing my home, or the stymieing of future homes for other people. And it's a very nuanced issue, but this affects every landowner in Ada County and potentially the state, because it's not just the broad definition of the language, but it's being able to use your property as you see fit within the confines of the law, in which we're discharging firearms legally and safely. But if you read through, and it sounds like you read through that report, it's dangerous in how the language is written, because they're making decisions based on inferences from the code rather than the code itself. There's language in the report that says, well, the code says this, but it really means much more. It doesn't. The code, for example, says it must be a business or a place, building, or a place. I don't have the definition in front of me. They said, well, that definition should be expanded to include more than that. And it's more than just the definition, but it's how this is used. So they're using an inference to further the code than is what's written in it. And so right now, as it sits, based on what they're telling me is this the problem is I'm using an improved area. If I didn't improve it, would it still be a shooting range? I don't know because the code is unclear, but there's no place of business, there's no building. That's why I don't fall under this code section. But their statements have been, if you even personally continue to use this, you need a conditional use permit. So because they're disputing in here the question as to whether it's commercial or non-commercial, and the point they've made in their staff report is the code is purposefully broad so that it doesn't matter. Well, when you say a place of business, that certainly implies commercial activity, right? So a place of business or a building pursuant to the code requires a place of business or a building. Definitions are important. That's why defined terms can make or break cases. And if this is permitted to stand, then Sam, if you own private property and you build a backstop for safety, you're creating a shooting range, even if it's just you going out and using it. And now you, as a private property landowner in Ada County, having built a backstop because you chose to be safe, must go get a conditional use permit. That's the reading that is from the staff report just published or just provided to us the other.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Mike, you've spent a lot of time in this land use issue, which is
Yeah.
really what we're talking about here. That's the broad category. And
Yeah.
this is a thorny topic, right? Because there's so many different lenses that you need to look at this through. But when you really simplify it, it's what right does the government have and how far does that right extend to regulate what a private property owner can do on their property? With your experience, where do you draw the line between a government's legitimate interest for the public good and a private property owner's right, using this as an example?
So I think the first question that you have to ask yourself, or the government should be asked, is if you're going to intervene for the public good, is there a public safety issue in question? If there's not a public safety issue either now, patently, or generally, or possibly latently, then is it directly adversely affecting the public in their use of property nearby? I think those are the two basic things you must ask yourself before you can intervene. And essentially, Sam, this is a taking.
Yeah, yeah, and that seems abundantly clear given this situation. Just out of curiosity, where does the building permit stand for your personal residence? Is that still in limbo?
Oh, good question. So, in order to get the building permit, we had to perform a one-time split on the property. The one-time split required a survey and a number of documents to do that. That's all been completed. In fact, I've already received 2 new tax parcels. I have recorded 2 new deeds. The record of survey has been recorded. So, in all practicality, it's complete. We're just waiting for this hearing to occur on March 11th. And then Mr. Beck will give me a letter that says it's complete or it's not complete. I don't know. So that's the other question I actually would love to ask Mr. Beck or ask the county commissioners is, if you deny me tonight and I say to you, okay, I accept your position, I accept your, what I'll call a ruling, I'll accept that. And Mr. Castillo and Valence will no longer be training here. In fact, they'll be training on the BLM land that's contiguous to us. And I'll tell you why that's a fine idea, but why the neighbors may not have really wanted that. But that's maybe what they've pushed people to. But Mr. Castillo is not going to train here anymore. So I've satisfied property is now back in compliance because there's no more shooting range. Or is there? If I go and use it one time, does that mean the shooting range still exists? How long does a shooting range have to go fallow before the flag is removed and I'm permitted to build the building? I have no idea. There's no guidance in the code. I don't even know that there's an internal policy with Ada County that speaks to this issue. The question is completely open, and I have no idea what the response would be. I don't think that they know. It's just whether or not they feel like it.
Which is not where you want your rights and liberties to sit, is at the behest of a government bureaucrat wondering how they feel about an issue on a certain day or
Right.
what kind of a fingerprint they want to leave on a plan.
Right. That's exactly right.
So for folks that are listening to this and want to assist or wondering how can we prevent this from happening in our communities, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but voting is really crucial. Even
Oh,
though
man.
Mr. Beck isn't an elected official, his boss's bosses are. What kind of questions would you ask of people running for county prosecutor or a board of commissioners, county commissioners, that would help inform how they might perceive these kinds of issues?
I think the very first question is, what's your position on private property rights? I grew up here, my grandfather having the property, and I remember him telling me, son, if you don't like the way someone uses their property, you have three options. You can put up with it, sell your property, or you can buy their property. And so that is the Idaho approach to property rights. Now, if you're directly aggravating somebody or if you're causing harm, actual harm or damage, there's a mechanism for resolving that. It's a lawsuit, but that is also why you have Ada County prosecutors if there's real harm. So when it comes to voting and when it comes to the prosecutor, or it comes to the county commissioners, what is your opinion on one, private property rights, two, planning and zoning? How much involvement should the government have when it comes to determining how someone uses their private property? At what level is it a taking by the government? If I can no longer use my property for what I see fit as the best use of my property, then you have removed my freedom in my property and you've taken that from me, right? So that's called the taking. And this is a funny story because when Ada County development permits developers to build new subdivisions, it seems to all be down in the valley. We're not using the foothills. And the reason we're not using the foothills is because they're so pretty to look at, but they're terrible for agriculture. The soil up there is terrible. I have nearly 300 head of cattle, but that's about all I could do on 1,800 acres, leasing another 8,000 because the ground is so poor. In fact, I had the USDA come up at one point and try and help me with figuring out how I can improve my soils. We have noxious weeds. How do I get rid of these? We have invasive weeds. How do I get rid of these? We went through the process, and the USDA representative said, well, my recommendation is that you use chemical, and I'll use the word burn down, but you chemically burn everything here. And then you wait 3 years and you plant some new grass. And I said, well, if I chemically burn everything there, and Stack Rock Ranch is an all natural ranch. We don't do vaccinations and we don't do antibiotics. It's a natural ranch. I can't sell beef from cattle who have been eating the grass that 3 years ago we chemically burned down because I know that's still in the soil. And she said, well, really the best use of your property is, I know what your neighbors have done. I said, oh, so for development. And she just looked back. I think it wasn't until that point she realized what she said. I said, great. So when I apply to develop the south half of my ranch, and I'm going to put tons of homes down there, you're going to be the first person I call to testify that the soil in the foothills is not good for farming. It's not good for animals. The best use of that soil is to build homes.
Can't imagine that went over very well with the USDA
No,
inspector.
USDA, she's uttered a very bad word that I will not repeat here. So all of that to say, the regards to voting, asking the questions, at what point do you believe a taking occurs? And that's a nuanced question that would be for a prosecutor, but for county commissioners, again, just what is private property rights? What does that mean to you? At what point does the government get involved? Yeah.
And it surprises me, having been in city politics for a little while, the level to which some folks in city government and county government believe that they know best. And they get into politics at this level because you really have a lot of power at the city level. We've seen this in Post Falls, Boise, cities around Idaho where elected officials, particularly at the mayoral level, have a lot of sway. They can make a lot of decisions. Um, and that power ends up corrupting, and they start putting their fingerprints on all sorts of things that they shouldn't. So, here at the Gem State Brief, we're in the process of putting together a voter guide, not just for legislative races in the upcoming primary session, but also for offices like county prosecutors and judges and some of these lesser known offices that actually have a bigger impact on our quality of life on a real felt basis.
I don't think that people realize how much planning and zoning and the county commissioners have an effect on their life. I really don't think so.
Yeah. Well, this is a fantastic story to highlight this. For folks who want to support Mike and his efforts for the CUP, we'll drop a link in the show notes here where you can drop an email to the county commissioners and to the staff. Those comments all get logged. They're publicly available. And they make a difference when it comes to these kind of decisions. So, Mike, any final words as we draw to a close here?
I appreciate anyone who's willing to show up on the 11th at 6 p.m. at the Ada County Courthouse to help support us. Also, if you're interested in grass-fed beef that's all natural, stackrockranch.com. That's a shameless plug, sorry.
That's great.
We really appreciate the support. The whole reason we're even doing beef, doing the ranch, is because we believe in feeding community, and we believe in doing it well, and regenerative agriculture, and really trying to support the community that we're in. So we would love your support.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike, for coming on. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. This is Sam Rust signing off.